I'm writing this from the parking lot of a budget motel off Route 9, somewhere between the life I built and the wreckage I left behind. It's just past 2 in the morning. The engine's still running because I can't bring myself to go inside yet. There's a gas station receipt on the passenger seat and a cardboard box in the trunk that holds everything I bothered to take. 15 years. One cardboard box. I keep replaying the moment I realized it wasn't just a rough patch. It wasn't me being paranoid. It wasn't the stress of the job or the distance that creeps into a marriage when you stop paying attention. It was deliberate, calculated. And the person who helped plan it was someone I used to defend at family dinners. My name is Marcus. I'm 42 years old. Up until about 6 weeks ago, I thought I had a solid life. Not flashy, not remarkable, but solid. I'd spent 12 years building a small IT consulting firm from scratch. Nothing glamorous, just enterprise network infrastructure, cybersecurity contracts, the kind of work that keeps the lights on at hospitals and logistics companies. I had 8 employees, a decent reputation in the Mid-Atlantic region, and a house in a quiet neighborhood with a good school district we never ended up needing. My wife Nicole and I had been married 11 years. She worked in corporate communications at a pharmaceutical company downtown. We weren't the couple posting anniversary photos every year, but we were steady. Or so I believed. Then there's my brother-in-law, Derek. Nicole's younger brother, 38, investment banker at a firm in the city. The kind of man who enters a room and recalibrates it, 6 feet, tailored suits. The easy confidence of someone who has never once doubted whether he belonged somewhere. Nicole's parents, Frank and Carolyn, worship him. Always have. Derek got a bonus. The whole family celebrated. Derek got promoted. Carolyn called everyone she knew. I once closed a contract worth more than Derek's annual salary, and Frank's response was a polite nod and a pivot back to asking Derek about his stock picks. I made peace with it a long time ago. Derek was charming and I was functional. That was the dynamic, and I accepted it. What I didn't accept, and what I never saw coming, was the day I found out my wife and her brother had been having quiet, methodical conversations about what to do with me. It started the way these things always do. Incremental. Nicole had been distracted for months, but I chalked it up to a difficult project at work. She stopped asking about my day. She'd go to bed early when I was still in the home office. She took more calls in the car. I noticed, but I told myself it was a phase. We'd been through rough stretches before. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. I came home early from a client meeting that got pushed, and Nicole's laptop was open on the kitchen counter. She'd stepped out to get the mail. I wasn't snooping. I just walked past it, but the screen was on, and what I saw stopped me cold. It was a text thread mirrored to her laptop from her phone. Derek's name at the top. The message visible was from him. He's never going to take this to the next level, Nick. The business is stuck. He's stuck. You stuck. You know this. I stepped back. I heard the front door open. By the time Nicole walked into the kitchen, I was pouring a glass of water with my back to her, hands steadier than they had any right to be. She closed the laptop without looking at me. Said dinner would be ready in 40 minutes. I said great and went upstairs. That night I lay on my side of the bed staring at the ceiling, running calculations. I didn't confront her. Something told me not to. Something cold and clear clicked into place in my chest and said, wait, watch, learn. If I blew up now, I'd get tears, denials, and a conversation that went nowhere. If I waited, I'd get the truth. I'm in IT. I understand systems. And the thing about systems is that people always leave traces. Nicole and I shared a cloud storage account for years. Joined files, tax documents, vacation photos. She'd stopped using it, or so she assumed. What she didn't know was that her phone was still backing up to it automatically. I hadn't looked through it in 2 years, so when I opened it the next morning from my office, I wasn't sure what I'd find. I found 4 months of text message backups. I took the rest of the day off. I sat in my office with the door locked and I read everything. The text between Nicole and Derek went back to November. What I found wasn't a physical affair. It was something I almost found harder to process. It was a campaign. Systematic, deliberate, and chillingly practical. Derek had spent months slowly convincing my wife that I was a ceiling, that my business was a liability, that she had outgrown the life we built together and was too loyal to admit it. He told her she deserved someone in her professional league, someone with trajectory. He told her she'd spent her best years supporting a man who would never be anything more than a glorified IT handyman. His words. Then he pivoted to the business. He told her that if she wanted to move on, she should do it before we hit our next fiscal year, because there was real equity in my company and she'd be entitled to a portion in a divorce. He told her to document things, to be strategic. One exchange made my hands go numb, Nicole. Do you think he suspects anything? Derek. No. He trusts you completely. That's actually his biggest problem. He's too passive. Always has been. Just keep things normal for another month or two and we'll figure out the next step. So it wasn't just talk. There was a next step. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew enough to start preparing. I didn't go home crying. I didn't call my best friend and vent over beer. I opened a new document and started building a file. The thing about Derek was that his entire life was built on perception. He was a big personality in a world that rewarded big personalities. But I'd been around him for 11 years. I'd watched the way he operated at family events, the offhand things he said when he thought no one was really listening, and I'd heard enough over the years to have questions about how clean his professional life actually was. I started doing what I do. Research. I pulled public records, court filings, company registrations. I reached out quietly to 2 former colleagues who moved through the same financial circles Derek operated in. What came back over the following 3 weeks was not a smoking gun, but it was a pattern. Derek had a side LLC registered in his girlfriend's name. It received consulting fees from 2 firms he'd steered institutional client money toward. Nothing prosecutable on its own, but deeply uncomfortable. The kind of thing a compliance department would take very seriously. I sat on it. I kept going home. I kept having dinner with my wife. I kept being the man she and her brother had quietly decided was not enough. The breaking point came on a Saturday in April. Nicole told me she was spending the afternoon with her mother. I had no reason to question it. An hour after she left, I needed to find an insurance document and went to the filing cabinet in the study. In the back of the hanging folder marked Personal, I found a folded sheet of paper. It was a handwritten list. My assets, itemized. My business valuation estimate, circled. A note in Nicole's handwriting, talk to attorney before May. I stood in the study for a long time. Then I sat down at my desk and made some calls. Nicole's parents lived about 40 minutes away in a suburb they'd been in for 30 years. Her father, Frank, was a retired civil engineer. Her mother, Carolyn, ran the household and the family's social calendar with the same precision. They were decent people, I'd always believed. A little blind to Derek's flaws, but decent. I drove out there unannounced on a Sunday morning. Frank answered the door looking surprised. I asked if we could talk privately. He brought me into the kitchen. Carolyn was at church. I told them what I'd found. Not everything, just enough. I told Frank that I had reason to believe Nicole was planning to leave, and that Derek had been actively encouraging it, and that it had been going on for months. Frank's face shifted. He rubbed the back of his neck. He sighed in a way that told me this wasn't entirely news to him. He said, Marcus, Nicole's not happy. You have to see that. She's been feeling like you're not growing together. I stared at him. He continued, Derek cares about his sister. He just wants her to be in a good situation. You've been comfortable for a long time, and sometimes comfortable isn't enough. You can't blame a woman for wanting a partner who's ambitious. I asked him if he knew Derek had been coaching his daughter on how to time a divorce for maximum financial gain. Frank looked uncomfortable but didn't look shocked. He said, That's just Derek looking out for family. I left. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes, and I made a decision. I was done grieving this. I was done being quiet and fair and measured. They wanted strategy. I'd spent 12 years learning how to think in systems. I would give them strategy. I called my attorney that week, not to start divorce proceedings yet, just to understand my position. She walked me through everything and told me I was in reasonable shape, but that timing and documentation mattered. I thanked her and kept building my file. The next move was Derek. I reached out to a former colleague named Raymond, who had spent years in financial compliance before moving to a consulting role. I'd helped his firm with an infrastructure overhaul 3 years back, and we'd stayed in touch. I asked him to have a look at what I'd assembled. I didn't tell him it was personal. I framed it as a referral I needed to evaluate. Raymond called me back 2 days later. He said what I had wasn't enough to file a formal complaint on its own, but it was enough to prompt an internal audit at Derek's firm if it came from the right direction. He mentioned that the firm's compliance officer, a woman named Patricia, was known to be thorough and not particularly friendly toward anything that looked like it could generate regulatory exposure. I asked if he knew her. He said he did. I asked if he'd be willing to pass along the information anonymously, framed as a concern from someone in the industry. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "This isn't really a referral evaluation, is it?" I told him no. He asked if the person involved had done something worth this. I told him yes. He said he'd take care of it. 2 weeks later, I found out through the same network that Derek had been called into an internal compliance review. The side LLC was flagged. 2 of the client referrals were under review. He'd been placed on temporary administrative leave while the firm investigated. I was in my office when I found out. I didn't celebrate. I just felt something settle, like a foundation finally going level. Nicole noticed something had changed in me but couldn't place it. She tried twice to start conversations about where we were heading as a couple. I listened. I asked questions. I didn't show my hand. Whatever attorney she was planning to visit in May, I wanted to be several steps ahead of her when she did. The second part of my strategy was something I hadn't planned, but that fell into my lap. Derek had a serious girlfriend, a woman named Sylvia, who'd been with him for almost 3 years. I'd met her at family events. She was warm, sharp, and clearly more invested in that relationship than Derek was. A colleague of mine happened to know her through a professional association, and she reached out to me directly in mid-April. She said she'd heard through the grapevine that I was going through something with Nicole. She said she had her own questions about Derek and wanted to talk. We met for coffee. She looked like someone who'd been running on little sleep and controlled composure for weeks. She told me Derek had been distant for months. She'd found references in his email to financial arrangements she didn't understand, including the LLC. She asked me what I knew. I showed her the text between Nicole and Derek, not all of them. Enough. She read them slowly. She put the phone down on the table. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "He told me your wife was pursuing him, that he was trying to manage it." I told her that was not accurate. She nodded. She looked out the window. Then she said, "Did you know he borrowed money from my account twice last year? He said it was for a real estate deal. I never saw any paperwork." I told her I thought she should talk to an attorney and that she should document everything she could before saying anything to Derek directly. She asked me why I was helping her. I told her the truth, that partly I was helping her because she didn't deserve what was happening to her, and partly because I wanted every piece of this to land at once. She thanked me, and we went our separate ways. In the first week of May, 3 things happened within 4 days of each other. The first was that Derek's firm completed their preliminary compliance review and suspended him pending further investigation. One of the client's steering referrals had a paper trail that was difficult to explain. The side LLC payments were being treated as undisclosed conflicts of interest. His name was being referred to the relevant regulatory body. The second was that Sylvia ended her relationship with Derek and, based on what I'd told her, filed a civil claim for the money he'd borrowed. It wasn't a large amount in the grand scheme of things, but it was public record. The third was that Nicole came home on a Thursday evening and told me she wanted a separation. I told her I'd been expecting it. She looked surprised. She started to say she hoped we could be mature about this. I told her I intended to be entirely professional throughout the process. I also told her my attorney had already filed for the formal accounting of marital assets, that I had documentation of certain communications I'd be handing to my legal team, and that I wished her the best going forward. She asked what I meant by documentation. I told her she'd find out. The look on her face was not what I expected. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to fear. The look of someone who suddenly understood that the person they'd been underestimating had not, in fact, been asleep. What followed was not dramatic in the way people might picture. No screaming, no confrontation at the family home. Nicole moved into a hotel for 2 weeks while we worked through the initial legal process. Her parents called me once. Carolyn led the conversation. She told me I was being vindictive, that I was punishing Nicole for having feelings, that what Derek had done was just family loyalty and I was blowing it out of proportion. She asked me why I couldn't be the bigger person. I told her that the bigger person in a situation like this was whoever was still standing when it was over. She said that was a very sad way to look at marriage. I said she was probably right. Frank got on the phone briefly at the end. He was quieter than Carolyn. He said he hoped I knew they'd always liked me. I told him I appreciated that. There wasn't anything else to say. Derek called me on a Tuesday night about 2 weeks after his suspension. I almost didn't pick up. I don't know why I did. His voice was different. The smooth, practiced confidence was gone. He sounded like he hadn't slept in days. He told me he knew I'd been behind what happened at his firm. I didn't confirm or deny it. He said I'd destroyed his career over a sister he'd only ever tried to look out for. I told him there were a few different ways to interpret the text between them, and that the compliance issue was something he built entirely on his own. He said I'd made him into an enemy for no reason. I told him he'd made himself into one. He called me a bitter, small man who would have nothing left when this was over. I told him I had my business, my reputation, my health, and my dignity, and that the person I used to be would have bent himself in half trying to keep the peace even after finding that list in the filing cabinet. That person was gone. This version of me was not interested in being managed. He hung up. I sat in my home office for a long time after that. The house was quiet in a way that felt different from before. Before, the quiet had bothered me, especially in the months when Nicole and I were drifting. Now, it just felt like space. Room to breathe. The divorce process took about 4 months. It was not pleasant, but it was cleaner than it could have been, mostly because I had documentation that made extended litigation unattractive to Nicole's team. We divided things equitably. She kept certain assets we'd accumulated together. I kept full ownership of my business, which was the thing that mattered most. No acrimony in the final meetings. Just 2 people finishing something that had already been over for longer than either of us had acknowledged. I sold the house. I found a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building downtown with decent light and no memories attached to anything in it. I painted the main room a color Nicole would have hated. I bought furniture I actually wanted. Small things, but they added up to something. Derek's regulatory matter dragged on for almost a year. I followed it through public filings without any particular satisfaction. He was eventually censured by the regulatory body and required to divest from the LLC structure. He wasn't criminally prosecuted, but his career at that firm was finished. He moved to a smaller shop in another city. Sylvia's civil claim was settled quietly. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Derek and Nicole had a falling out over money at some point in the fall. Apparently, he'd expected her to help him cover some of his legal costs. Apparently, she declined. There's a version of this story where I tell you, I'm glad I did what I did, where I describe some moment of triumph, a clean narrative arc with a lesson neatly tied at the end. That's not quite how it feels from the inside. What I'll tell you is that there's a certain kind of exhaustion that comes from spending months being calculating, from watching everything, saying nothing, waiting for the right moment. I was good at it, which was its own uncomfortable discovery. I hadn't known that version of me was in there. The one who could sit across from his wife at dinner knowing what he knew and keep his face neutral. The one who could have a cordial conversation with his in-laws at Easter while running a parallel operation in his head. I'm not ashamed of what I did exactly. They came after my business, my livelihood, things I built with 12 years of my life. They talked about me like I was a problem to be managed. Derek called me weak, passive, stuck. Maybe he was right about the man I was before all this, but that man stopped existing the moment I found that list in the back of the filing cabinet. What I am is clear-eyed about the cost. I don't talk to Nicole. I don't talk to her family. I have no contact with Derek, and I expect that's permanent. There are people who knew us as a couple who don't know what to do with the fact that we're not anymore. I've stopped explaining. The people who matter understand enough, and the ones who don't aren't people I need to maintain. My business is fine. Better than fine, actually. In some strange way, the last 18 months stripped out every distraction and left me with just the work, which I'm good at, and the people who depend on me to do it well. We closed 2 major contracts this year that I wouldn't have had the bandwidth to pursue if my life had stayed exactly as it was. Some evenings, I still drive past the old neighborhood without planning to. The house sold quickly. Someone else is in it now with their own furniture and their own version of what home feels like. I don't feel much when I pass it. Mostly, I feel curious about what I thought I was building there and whether it was ever real or whether I was the last one to know it wasn't. A colleague asked me last spring if I regretted how I handled it, whether I thought I'd taken things too far. I thought about Derek's text. Some people are just born to be managed. I thought about Frank's voice telling me that Derek was just being family. I thought about Nicole's handwritten list in the back of the filing cabinet. I told him I regretted that it was necessary. I don't regret that I did it. There's a difference. I understand that now. Maybe I didn't before. What I know is that quiet doesn't mean passive. Patient doesn't mean weak, and the person who underestimates you because you've never given them a reason to be afraid of you has already made the most expensive mistake they'll ever make. I don't go to bed angry anymore. I don't wake up calculating. The apartment has good light in the mornings, and I make coffee and I sit by the window, and most days that's enough. Not every morning, but most. That might not sound like much. But after everything, it sounds exactly right.